This is Dan Bolen, and I'm the host of the podcast, The Courage to Be Courageous, where people come from all over the world have been able to use courage to get through their fear and be their authentic self. I want to thank all of my listeners for joining us today. We have a great individual that we're going to interview today, someone who actually has become a friend of mine and my partner, John. And we met actually at a social group that we do on Friday. And remember, I've told my podcasters in the past, we all need a community. And we have a community, as many of you know, we're part of Front Runners and Walkers, but we also have a community that we meet every Friday and have a happy hour and go to dinner of some wonderful gay men. And that's a great community. And that's how I met our podcast guest today, David Pederson. And Dave, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today. We appreciate you taking the time to tell us a little about your story, the courage that you've shown, and being able to overcome some of the fears in your life. So tell us a little bit about yourself, David, and where you grew up and what your life was like.
Sure. Thanks, Dan, and thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure knowing you. It's a pleasure knowing you and John and everybody in the group. It's a lot of fun. You're right. Community is so important. I was born in Colorado. My dad was a miner there in one of the mines, but he was very much a nomad, and he got restless, and he would travel around a lot, move from place to place and job to job. So I never put down a lot of roots as a little kid. I was always making new friends, changing schools, moving around. So it was a little bit difficult at times, but I kept myself entertained. And part of my entertaining was through writing and escaping, because I wasn't super popular. I was always the new kid in school, didn't have a lot of friends. So I would write and make up stories to entertain myself and to escape some of the reality. So when I wrote, I could be super popular and super good looking and do whatever I wanted. So it was a lot of fun.
And you can create kind of your own fantasy, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, makes sense, yeah. But tell us a little bit about then how I think you ended up eventually moving to Wisconsin, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep. My dad moved the family to Wisconsin. My mom was from Wisconsin, although she was born and raised on the western part of the state, near the Mississippi River. But my dad moved us to the east side of the state, near the Lake Michigan. And I think at that point, my sisters were about 10 years older than I am, and they had it far worse. They changed schools frequently. Once we moved to Wisconsin, I think my mom put her foot down a little bit and said, enough's enough of this moving around stuff. And we're going to at least stay in the same state. So even though we still changed houses frequently and moved around, and I still had to change schools, at least we weren't moving quite as much at that point. So I grew up in Wisconsin, and went to school there. When I finished school, then I moved out to New York for a while. I took a job with a retail outlet company and moved up, started out as store manager, and then I went to area manager, then district manager, and then eventually director of training and development. And I was in upstate New York for a while, and then they moved me up to Massachusetts for a while, and then I got transferred back to Wisconsin to work in the headquarters. Wow,
fascinating. Now, didn't you also eventually leave retail and move into property management?
I did, yep. So I worked at the retail company for 15 years total, and I thought that was my career for life. I was going to be there, and they went bankrupt. So I went to the property auction, and Wilson's Leather, which I don't believe is in business anymore either, but they bought the retail division, which is the division I was working for, and they made me a pretty nice offer to move to Minneapolis and work for them. But I was done moving, and I just met my life partner, Alan, and we were getting to know each other, and I just didn't want to leave Wisconsin, didn't want to leave the Milwaukee area. So I turned it down and decided to reinvent myself. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I decided to take a shot at property management. So I was living in an apartment community called Juneau Village. It's 598 apartments over 3 buildings, and ended up being the manager there for 7 years. And eventually that just got a little old. So I left that and decided to reinvent myself yet again and take a chance on working at a furniture gallery and as a decorator and furniture salesperson. That was definitely a risky proposition. It was 100% commission, but I did very well with it, and I did that for 12 years.
Wow. So you've
Until
had
they went bankrupt.
yes, you've had a very diverse career, changing and really thriving at what you were doing well at all 3 of those. So tell us a little bit about when you started realizing you could write and that you could be a writer and create stories. I think you mentioned you've always liked old movies and you've liked to tell us a little bit about that. I think this is fascinating. And when we get into it, I've read several of David's books. We're going to talk about them, and they're outstanding. But I don't want to take away. I don't want to take away what David has to say about his books, but they're fantastic. We're going to talk about them later. So go ahead and tell me when you started feeling I'm a writer and I can do this.
Thanks, Dan. I sometimes still wonder if I'm a writer and I can do this.
Well, I wrote a book, and I'm not a writer, but I think the book is pretty powerful, and so are yours. Okay, so go ahead.
Well, I always have that self-doubt nagging in the back of my mind. But yeah, as I think I mentioned before, I wrote as a little kid to escape reality sometimes and make my own reality. And one time in school, our English teacher had us read our stories that we'd written aloud in class. And it was a funny story about the time my sister mistook pimple cream for toothpaste. And, to little kids, that's hilarious. So I got a lot of laughs from my classmates, and I thought to myself, wow, this is pretty cool. I wasn't good in sports. I wasn't athletic. I wasn't really good at much else. I didn't have a lot of other friends. So this was my way in to gaining some acceptance and getting people to notice me was through my writing and making people laugh. So I thought, hey, this is fun. I enjoy it. So I kept writing, and I wrote regularly for many, many years.
And then you also had to deal with who you were as a person, that you were a gay man. Tell us how that came to be and how you knew you were different and how you were able to work through that process of accepting you authentically.
Yeah, I think I've probably always known I was gay. I mean, when I was a really little kid, my best friend was probably my cousin. Her name's Linda, and we just had a blast playing together. I had a lot more fun playing with her. My brother and my male cousin, they were out throwing the football around, bouncing the basketball, doing those kinds of things, and I really had no interest in that. I wanted to play inside and play house and make things with their easy bake oven. And then as I grew older, a little bit older, as you mentioned, I love old movies, and I was always fascinated. And I think for anybody who's read my books, they're set mainly in the 40s, and I get asked a lot why they were set in the 40s. And I think partly I am an old soul, but I also grew up watching all those old movies, those old black and white, the MGMs, musicals. And I think life should be more like a musical. It should have a happy ending with lots of singing and dancing, but we deal with what we got. I make my own musicals and I make my own singing and dancing. So, but as I watched those movies, I realized I was far more attracted to the male lead than the female lead. And I had sexual feelings towards, Rock Hudson and all the old movie stars that were so handsome and big as life up on the screen. So that definitely rang true for me that, okay, there's something different about me. I'm not a typical guy.
Did you know at that time that you were gay?
I knew I was different. I knew I wasn't like my brother. I wasn't like my male cousins. I wasn't like the other boys in my class. As far as I knew, that were all interested in girls. But obviously, I wasn't ready to accept that about myself completely. And I certainly wasn't ready to tell anybody else about that.
Why weren't you? Why at that time was there shame and embarrassment and rejection? Do you think all of those would be involved?
Definitely all of those: shame, rejection, fear of rejection, yep, embarrassment. I think the closer you are to somebody, sometimes the harder it is to be your authentic self, because you don't want to ruin what you have or risk ruining what you have. So that was definitely something that I felt I needed to keep hidden. I didn't really know any other gay people at that time. I mean, this was back in the 70s. You didn't see a lot of representation of it. The movies that were shown that I saw always ended tragically for the gay person.
Yes,
Ended up dying or being killed or whatever, and very miserable and unhappy. Or they were the silly sidekicks that, were there for comic relief. So I didn't really have anything relatable to that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was challenging. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I kept it hidden for many years.
So when did you actually come to accept yourself as who you were? Is there any period of time where you thought, I know it's a process, it's not an event, it's really a process that we do that. But there was a time that you were able to say, this is who I am, I defined who I am, and we're able to accept it. Was there any part in your life where that started to emerge?
Mostly in high school.
Okay.
I started to accept who I was. I started to realize that, it's not going to change as much as I wanted it to at the time. I mean, I'm very, very happy with my life and who I am now. But back then I wanted very badly to be different. I didn't want to be, to be the same. I didn't want to be different. I wanted to be just like everybody else, and tried dating women, and it just didn't work. It wasn't me. So I realized, okay, I'm going to have to accept this and deal with it. And like I say, and now I'm very happy, and it's been a wonderful thing. And if I could go back right now, I wouldn't change a thing, even if I could.
Wow, that's powerful. I appreciate that so much. Let's talk about your coming out to your mom and your dad. Of course, your dad passed away when you were, 29 or so?
Yep, right around 29, yep.
Okay, but he did not know you were gay.
I'm sure my mom and him discussed it. I came up to my mom roughly at 18. She didn't take it real well, but it was just one of those things that I think she thought it was going to be a phase and would go away. We didn't really talk about it after that. But I'm sure she talked about it with my dad. And I have two sisters and a brother. I'm the youngest of four, and they all know. And my mom, everybody's been great now. I don't know why I was so afraid of back then, but they all love my husband. And my husband and I have been together 29 years, and they all treat him like part of the family.
And he is part of the family. That's incredible, too. I remember something that David told me when he first come out to his mom and showed courage to be able to overcome the fear, to say that he was gay. And she said, you don't put on women's clothing, do you? Was that
Yep. That was her reaction when I first told her. And I assured her I did not. And that was the end of that discussion. And it was, from then on, it was like nothing was ever discussed about it again. But, she came around. She accepted it eventually. So.
And I want to say one thing about your father, because he was a very kind man and very supportive man. Telling about when he was doing a taxi cab driver and he would pick up people that were drunk, what he would do. I think this shows the depth of David's dad's empathy and being very empathetic and kind to people. Tell us about the story you told me. I think it's really a very, very encouraging story. We can all learn from that.
My dad was one of a kind. He was a unique, charming, sweet fellow, one of the most big-hearted men I've ever met. I'm proud to be his son, and gives me something to look up for. He taught me the meaning of keeping your word and of being honest. And he, like I said, he was a nomad. He would change jobs frequently. He probably had 35 to 40 jobs over the course of his life. Everything from miner to truck driver to milkman to beer distributor to gas station attendant to cab driver and everything in between. But yeah, I remember a few mornings we would wake up and come into the living room and there'd be a stranger sleeping on our couch that he had picked up from his cab driver that was drunk or had no place to go and needed a place to sleep it off. So my dad would bring him home.
Well, not necessarily to the liking of your mother, right? She wakes up and finds a strange man on her couch. Who is this?
Yeah, she wasn't too happy about that.
But it showed a deep love of people that he had as well, too. Well, we want to talk a little bit about how you and Alan met. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the tragedy that you had in your life, coming from a gay country bar, and what happened to David and how he used so much courage to get through an incredible amount of fear. So tell us about what happened and how you were able to use courage to get through that.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the darker periods. I was living in Milwaukee and working for the retail outlet company, and was I met some friends that we would go country dancing with, and I was a terrible country dancer, but they encouraged me to go with them. So I would go with them, and it was always on a Friday night at a gay bar, and they did country dancing, and I stood around and mostly watched the others dance, but occasionally I would go out there and make a fool of myself, trip on my own feet.
We've all done that as well.
Yep. But one night, so my friends and I left, and the bar was on a corner, and we walked out the bar, and my friends had parked up the street and they went to the left. I went around to the side because I'd parked up on the side street, and I was just walking to my car. And I even saw these four guys coming towards me, but I really didn't think anything of it. I mean, I'm a pretty big, strapping guy. I'm 6'3". Never felt any fear of them. I just assumed they were probably heading to the bar. So, but the next thing I knew, they had knocked me down and were beating the literal crap out of me. I think my pants were a mess. Everything was a mess. And I ended up in the hospital over that, and ended up with plastic plate in my head. They bashed my head in. My God! There was blood everywhere. It was pretty horrific. Thank God I survived. The police asked me if I could identify them, and my memory was pretty gone for that day. It took a while to even remember where I'd been or anything that had happened. But yeah, all I could tell them was there was four guys.
It was really.
I hesitate to call them men because they were hardly men. They were cowards.
Yeah, very cowards. Yeah. To do a gay bashing of someone, four men taking one person out is inhuman, a tragedy. But you showed courage to get through it. I think you said you were in the hospital for 2 weeks, maybe?
2 weeks. Yeah.
But tell us about the fear you had and how you were able to overcome the fear of going back into a gay bar again.
I was terrified. The recovery was really slow. One good thing, I didn't have a lot to do at that time. It was, definitely before social media and computers weren't big or anything like that. So I read a lot and I started writing again. So I really delved into writing a book at that point. And I vowed at one point that I was certainly never in hell going to go back to that bar again. And, to hell with country dancing. I needed it. I wasn't any good anyway. But as I thought about it, as I recovered and my hair grew back where I had my plastic plate, and that was one of my biggest fears, was my hair wasn't going to grow back.
Yeah.
But it did, and my face healed for the most part. My left side of my face is still not quite as symmetrical as the right because of it, but yeah, I healed.
Well, you're still good looking, though.
You're too kind. I was emotionally a mess, and I broke down many times. Nightmares, fears. But I decided that I wasn't going to let these cowards ruin something that I did enjoy. Because even though I wasn't good at country dancing, I enjoyed going to the bar. I enjoyed watching people. And I enjoyed the whole experience. So one night I gathered up every ounce of courage I had and put on my boots again, and I went down there. I parked under a streetlight on the main street, and
was it the same gay bar? Was it the same gay bar that you were gay bashing? Wow,
that was the only bar with country dancing. So
tremendous amount of courage it took going in. Yeah.
Yep, but I did it. And
I want to applaud your courage on that, David. Here you could have been beaten to death, and then all of a sudden you began to realize, I got to take the power away from these cowardly men. I'm not going to give them any more power, even though it may have taken time. You use courage to be able to get through that. And what's fascinating about this is where David met his husband. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Not too long after I went back to that bar, I saw this handsome cowboy, and I thought, he's pretty cute. But I didn't approach him, but he came up and asked me to waltz. We waltzed to the well, it's not really a country song, but it's the song "My Favorite Things" from Sound of Music.
Oh yes,
and yeah, that became our song. So that was the first song we ever danced to. So we waltzed to that. I stepped all over his feet. I was a decent two-stepper. I was a terrible waltzer, and not very good at line dancing. But he pushed me around the floor, and after the song ended, I'm like, yeah, he's never going to ask me to dance again. That was horrible. He's a very good dancer. He belonged to the country dance group, actually. But he did ask me to dance again, and over several times that night, and until we agreed to go out to dinner soon after. So, yeah. And the rest is history, 29 plus years later.
Oh, fantastic. And I think you said to me, which was very touching to me, you said, he's my best friend, and he's my inspiration. And that speaks so highly of Alan. And of course, I know Alan as well, and he's a great man. And David and Alan are two great people. I have so much love and respect for both of them. But we're going to talk a little bit about David's writing here. I think this is fantastic. I've read 3 of his books. And let me tell you something. He's a mystery writer, and I'm trying to figure out this mystery all the way through the book, and I never have come close to figuring it out, because he puts little pieces along the way that, you're supposed to kind of maybe figure it out. I think I have it figured out, and I've never gotten close to the answer. But once I find the answer at the end of the book, it's like, okay, I need to go back and read it to see if I can see those little pieces again. Fascinating writer. So tell us about your writing right now, the 2 different types, or 2 different, I guess you would say, book series that you have, and how it's, I've been able to go to 2 of David's book signings, and he reads part of the book set that I haven't got into yet, and they're fascinating books, and David does a great job of reading them and playing the parts. So tell us about your book writing and how that is going for you now.
Yeah, it's going amazingly well. I'm so thrilled and so pleased that people actually like what I write. And I've gotten fan mail from Australia and England and all over the place. So it's been really exciting, and I couldn't be more happy with that. I've written 7 of the Heath Barrington books. Those are mostly set in and around the Milwaukee area, and as I mentioned before, they're set mostly in the 1940s. And I've written 3 Mason Adlers, which are set mostly in the Arizona area. The third one is set in Palm Springs, and it's just been a terrific experience for me to live vicariously through my characters and to create things and worlds and places that I just think are fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Incredible writing. I've had, again, give us that's the Heath Barrington series, and that's 7 books. Mm-hmm. And then the second series is what again?
It's called the Mason Adler series.
Mason Adler. So and how many books is that?
10 total.
How many are they of the Mason Adler?
3 Mason Adlers and 7 Heath Barrington.
Excellent. So I'm sure you're going to keep writing.
Oh, I am. Mm-hmm. They're all gay detectives, and they all have LGBTQ plus characters too. So even though they're set in the 40s, I mean, gay life was very, very different back in the 40s. But I like to show the courage that those characters had back then to be their authentic selves, even though they were often almost always had to be closeted or hidden and very careful and cautious about who they opened up to. They lived their lives and they were who they were. And I like to show through my writing, besides obviously the mystery, I like to show that LGBTQ people have always been here and have always existed, and that they are often in the shadows, but they are always doing extraordinary things with their lives.
Very good. Excellent. So if someone wants to pick up your books, David, they can purchase them on Amazon. I know. I got some of yours at your book signing. Is there any particular website they can go to read about these books and have some insight on them?
Yeah, my website is just www.davids, as in Sam, Pederson, Pederson, or Pederson.com. So davidsPederson.com is the website to go to, and gives you probably more information than you'd ever want to know.
And they can purchase them on Amazon, and they can purchase them on Goodread, I'm sure.
They can be ordered from any local bookstore.
Okay.
And also my publisher's website, which is Bold Strokes Books. They sell them directly as well. So they're available. They're out there.
And I encourage you all to read them. I have several of David's that I've got lined up to read, and I'm looking forward to be able to. Mine have been all the first series. I haven't read any of the second series, and I'm excited to be able to do that as well too. And it's been such a pleasure interviewing you. And as I always ask my guests, how their life would be able to affect others. And of course, the podcast is always the courage to be courageous. David has showed a tremendous amount of courage to get through severe fear in his life. And that is such a powerful story. And I applaud David's courage to be able to do that and being his authentic self. I always ask, though, David, my podcast guests, if there's any story or any moral or any tidbit of your life that you would like to share with others, because people come from all walks of life listening to my podcast. Not only do we have LGBTQ people, but we also have heterosexual allies as well. What would you like to share with them on their story if they're going through a tremendous amount of fear and they need courage to get through it?
My philosophy and my go-to phrase for many, many years has been, keep moving, don't stop. And that actually came from a real life experience that I had when I was just in my early 20s and living out in New York, working for that retail company, because I was living in upstate New York and I had to take a bus from the Port Authority up to upstate New York. I was heading home after a visit back to Wisconsin, and my flight was late into the airport, so I missed my bus that night, and the next bus up to Monticello in the Catskill Mountains where I lived wouldn't be till the next morning. So I was basically stuck in the Port Authority overnight, and that was back in the 80s. It was not a very pleasant place to be. I didn't know what to do, so I went up to a police officer and I asked him, I explained my situation, and I asked him if he had any advice for me. And his advice to me was keep moving, don't stop, don't fall asleep, and stay off the top floor. So that's exactly what I did. I did not fall asleep. I stayed up all night. I just kept moving. I kept walking, circling around until I was finally able to board that bus early the next morning. And I was exhausted, but I made it home safe and sound. And that's the motto I've adopted, was to keep moving, don't stop. No matter what you're going through, you will get through it eventually, as long as you don't stop. And that's gotten me through a lot of things. That's gotten me through my cancer. I gotten me through all kinds of things. So my cancer is 7 years in the past right now, knock on wood, still doing well, and I'm still moving, and I'm not going to stop as long as I can.
I did not know, David, that you had cancer.
7 years ago, yeah. Prostate cancer. I had my prostate removed. It had spread to the margins, so I had to undergo 36 radiation treatments, and I had to undergo 2 years of hormone therapy after the surgery. But again, I just keep moving.
Wow. Well, I learned something from my own podcast. It's new to me. I'm surprised. I'm shocked. I did not know this about. And again, what a tremendous amount of courage that David showed to be able to deal with that in his life and be able to, as he said, keep moving, don't stop. And I think there's something else, and I've talked about this a lot on my podcast about having a community. And I think, David, you mentioned a comment to me about everybody has fear, but many who have fear are afraid to admit it.
It's true.
Why do you think that is?
I think people are afraid of rejection. I think they think they're the only ones going through a particular situation. They're afraid to reach out for help. And I say never be afraid of that. There's always somebody that's either experienced it or is experiencing what you're going through or feels what you feel. And there's always professionals out there too. And help is available in so many different ways. And you just got to be strong enough and courageous enough to ask for it. And that's just so important.
Oh, what an excellent comment. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, David. I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on my podcast today. I think it's going to influence a lot of people's lives. And thank you. I appreciate so much that you sharing your story, sharing the fears you've gone through and the courage that you've used, tremendous amount of courage that he's done, and is living a very great life and a very peaceful life. And I applaud you for that, David. And thank you so much for being on my podcast today.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you for sharing your story and your life with us as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, David. It's been fantastic. Bye-bye now.
Bye.